All right, John, I think just about everybody's here.
Okay, great. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, good. I'm using my wife's computer. I'm having computer troubles. That's why it's got me as Heather. Oh, I'm back as John Bark. I was at her name. Okay.
I changed.
Oh, you changed it. Thank you. Okay, well, let's get going then. Good morning, everyone. I am going to start just with an overview on the agenda. We talked about the findings, the general findings in the last advisory meeting, and made some changes and comments. So I've revised those and sent those out. Hopefully you guys have had a chance to look at that.
We lost him.
Won't go through items on that, and then talk about where the recommendations are leading, where the findings are leading us in terms of recommendations and alternatives. And I like to put out there a recommendation, something solid that you can then kind of comment on and we can revise and refine, rather than us going through an open, blank checkbook and try to develop something. So I'll be doing that, and then we'll talk about the next steps in the public meeting to discuss the study results. As far as the findings go, and you guys have gone through them, the real heavy is that the finding is that the major finding is that we have sufficient parking. We have sufficient parking, a supply of parking to meet demand, and that's borne out by the multi-day counts that we conducted. Supply and demand imbalances, though, and the most pronounced one is the difference between the use of the public supply and the private supply. It's quite interesting how different that is. And then there's an imbalance between the on-street supply and the off-street supply. That's less surprising, or that's more typical, I would say, for a free parking system, where the on-street is heavily used and the off-street maybe a little bit less. The other major finding really had to do with, what we consider warrants for parking, for paid parking, or warrants for parking meters. And those warrants really, we did some license plate surveys on street to try to find out how dynamic the street is or how stagnant it is. And really, as you remember, we found fairly poor parking turnover, poor availability of parking on most of the streets during peak seasonal time, poor compliance with the time limits, and high number of employees likely and confirmed by parking enforcement to be out there. So those are sort of the tenets, and that's sort of where we start when we look at our warrants met for meters. And here they clearly are, in the season. Remember, we counted in late September, early October. So, using the broader findings as a whole, we then put together, a parking program concept plan. And Audra, maybe before showing the map plan, maybe we can go through the parameters, list of parking parameters for the program. Put that up on the screen, because what I'd like to do is go through, what program parameters, where the data is leading us, where the comments are leading us, the public meeting we had, the comments we're receiving from you, letters that have come in, and the data. And so I'll go through all of these, and then we can come back and discuss them. And then we'll look at this in plan view, okay? What I'm seeing for hours of operation, again, paid parking is met. The warrants for meters are met. I think what we're looking at the data, it sort of tells us that a 9 to 5 Monday through Saturday would be a reasonable time period for paid parking. things really started to fall off at 5 o'clock. Now, one day there was a little bit of rain, the other day there wasn't, and we saw the same trend on those days. There could be an argument to go 9 to 6. But I started with the 9 to 5 as a base of program. The question of whether paid parking is seasonal or year-round is always something discussed in tourist based communities or heavily tourist used communities. You had pretty strong demand there for early October. Looking at Bar Harbor, they do this May 15 to October 30 timeframe. Likely though, through the season, your main street is still going to be at that effective capacity if it's free. So a lot of communities will just say, we're going to go year round. Some communities will say, hey, let's go seasonal, and if we find that it continues to be difficult through the winter, we'll go year round. I have communities like Plymouth, Massachusetts that are still seasonal. Newburyport, I just converted to year round. They were seasonal and at one time. And as I said, Bar Harbor I work with are still seasonal. So that would be the base sort of to talk about. Some communities do the optional Sunday 12, noon to 5. That's very common, or noon to whenever it ends. And that's just because of the impacts of churches downtown. So that's also an option. Okay. For the metered regulated streets and lots, what we're really trying to do is provide a mix of, in the retail district where there's high demand for customer visitor, we need shorter term parking, we need turnover, we need paid parking. As you move sort of out, we can store cars the further we go out, and you may still have paid permit parking, but we also want to provide all day free parking. And that came through in the comments in the public meeting and in some of the letters too, and that we really want to have a free parking alternative that's legitimate for employees. It might be a short walk to downtown. So there's a mix of this in both. Time limits for me, we're hearing loud and clear, the public landing lots and the lots, 2 hours is insufficient. We see as you go from free to paid, or if you go from under market pricing to a more market price, typically the hours can go up a little. You can allow people to stay a little longer because there's a more availability created by the pricing. When it's free, it's almost always 2 hours, right, or less. So, we're looking here, the recommendation would be to consider 3 hours on the street, extend that 15 minutes to 20 minutes. We talked about that. And then off street, 4 hours in those core commercial lots, right, on Mechanic Washington and Public Landing. Go to that 4 hour option. For a pricing structure, hourly rate, I'm suggesting $2 an hour on street and in the lots. Maybe a lower hourly rate as we move out a little bit. The public safety lot just described. That 2 hour, it kind of corresponds to what we have in Bar Harbor. It's what we have in Beach, in Biddeford. I think Kennebunkport and Old Orchard are $3 an hour at this point. So that $2 sort of is a base, what we're kind of seeing as a base rate. And that extends down into New Hampshire and northern Massachusetts too. So short-term parking, we had talked about maybe everything is first 20 minutes free at the meters, where there's an option for the customer to press a button and get the first 20 minutes free. And that kind of maybe reduces the need to have so many signed free 20-minute spaces. You still might want those, like at the post office and places where you want to make sure you have availability, but that will cut down on, we see that in other communities, cut down on the number of 15-minute spaces all over town. Permit parking, yes, employee permits, as we've talked about, employee permits, I'm suggesting $50 a season. This is something to talk about if it's seasonal. as an entry fee. I think Bar Harbor's $30 or $40 a season, something like that. I'd have to go back and look. Resident and fisherman permits are usually a nominal fee. And some communities will make those resident permits free. So permit parking, whether that's in a lot or on a street that might have residential on it, you might offer a resident and employee ability to park there. So this would be a very small permit program because you're just not offering that many locations, and you're not going to impact that many residents with the program here. Other common optional permits I mentioned, we see in Bar Harbor, for instance. I have in Plymouth and some of the other coastal communities, a bed and breakfast permit where you have that downtown. You have some over there on High Street. These typically tend to be very expensive permits because it's a for-profit business, but it's some communities recognize the importance of those spaces to bed and breakfast that might be short on parking. So that's something to think about. Resident guest passes, it can be a nominal fee. Recreational boaters, some communities will have that. Definitely a contractor use of space permit we want to have here in I would think in Camden, because of some of the comments we've heard about. That contractor permit just kind of memorializes early meetings with Public Works or police to kind of say, this is our understanding of the project, and it kind of puts a cost to the encumbrance of parking and some incentive for those contractors to finish on time and maybe not consume as much parking as otherwise. What I find is they'll take as much as you give them, and pricing kind of helps that. So everyone is moved to, who has paid parking, is moved to a contractor permit pretty much. Discounts, this is usually a determination made by the selectmen, select board or city council to decide on discounts. Every community provides different types of discounts to its residents, downtown residents, seniors, across the board, whether that's on the hourly meter rate, whether that's on the permit rate. This is ubiquitous. I mean, this is just kind of everybody really does it, and there isn't a right or a wrong. I just put it there because it's a political decision. And then fine rates, $35 is the average rate we see in New England for overtime or an expired meter. It provides enough of an incentive for someone. In Plymouth, I used the example in Plymouth, we had people parking on the waterfront in Plymouth just to look at the water, watch the Mayflower come and go, and that kind of thing. And they would take the ticket because there it was $15, and they thought it was the greatest price of admission to watch the water. They welcomed the parking ticket to pay the $15. So they knew right there they had to move that up, and this is what we typically see. Permit parking program, again, employees to move them to lots. The employee permit is the linchpin of all parking programs because they are the easiest user group to move. Usually once paid parking goes into place to the locations that you want them. And here we're kind of talking about the public safety lot as being a permit lot, and also having some, where you have employees parking today, Chestnut Street and Mountain Street, maybe that becomes 3-hour permit exempt, allow the permits to park there. For the resident, again, those two locations really are where we see most of that happening. For fishermen in the public landing lot, we heard about schooner tags. That's something we want to talk about. And bed and breakfast I mentioned. Shared parking agreements. The First Congregational Church lot we've talked about as being low-hanging fruit. That entry lot would be just absolutely perfect for a free lot as you're coming into town. And it provides a nice overflow for employee permits should they not be able to find, should a lot fill up. And it's well situated to even provide access to some of the areas where there's not as much parking. So it's a little more so. Christian Science Church, I know you had an agreement with them that can be renewed potentially. And then there's other lots that we talked about that are just underutilized when everything downtown is really just slammed. And so these all represent opportunities for the town to go to these owners and say, hey, can we open this up to provide one, additional revenue to you probably, but also better utilization to help out the entire downtown. Now, with the change that the town has recently made, going to with the zoning ordinance and doing away with certain minimums, some of this stuff will happen anyway, whether you move it forward or not. Some of these business owners are going to, as paid parking goes out on the street, are going to figure out that, you know, it's time to start to change the way they do business in those lots, and you'll start to see paid parking signs go up in those lots regardless. And that's typically what we see when towns move along with a program, and you get better utilization off street. Merchant validation and valet, we absolutely want. So we want to be able to allow the merchants to validate parking for their customers. You know, we'd have to have a program that says, well, what's the discount to them? You know, we'd want the merchant to contribute some to that validation, but those are very easy things to do with the technology we're going to be talking about. So validating for merchants is a very popular program. Valet is equally popular for restaurants and hotels particularly, but the valet is a great way for us to move vehicles out of the downtown while also providing high-end customer service right at the doorstep, right? So it's a win-win for everybody. It allows us to store vehicles outside. I have communities that I work for that do shared lot agreements like the Congregational Church just to move valet cars into it, right? That would otherwise be stacked up on Bayview. So that's a strategy that a lot of towns have used in terms of shared lots. Look, you're not using your lot. Can we use cars in those lots? And oh, by the way, we can stack cars in a valet lot. They don't have to be in the lines because they're controlled. So you can get 50% more spaces out of a parking lot by converting it to valet. So that's really important, a strategy going forward. As far as the technology goes, kind of what, you know, I'm seeing here, and it's very similar to Bar Harbor. You don't always have areas where you have really wide sidewalks, which we like to have for kiosks. The electronic meters, the single space meter, credit card accepting meters might be better on street where you've already lined your streets, and Dave's done such a great job doing that. It's already laid out. So you could go with single space meters. They are the highest customer, most responsive technology to the customer, right? Because they get out and they can just pay right there at their space. They don't have to walk to a kiosk, right? So that would be very high demand. Now I say that's for parallel spaces. When you get to head-in spaces like you have on Chestnut or down on Atlantic, there you would probably go pay stations, because angle parking operates more like a parking lot, and it's just so much more cost efficient for you than putting single space meters in those situations. So I would recommend that. And then off street, we go with kiosks always. Okay. With regard to permit parking, would be moving to a license plate. Our kiosks would be pay by license plate, where people enter their license plate into those kiosks. There are apps where you can preload your license plate on your phone and enter, but we would essentially be doing that. And the permit itself would be your license plate. It would no longer be a hang tag sticker, anything like that. It would just be the license plate. Everything would go to the license plate. We would also have a mobile payment app so that people who don't want to use the kiosks would have a contactless option to just use. It's very simple. You probably used it yourself somewhere. Pay by phone. It preloads the meter, and it also allows them to pay for parking remotely or add time to their meter when they're still sitting in the restaurant eating, if they think it's going to expire. So there's so many good things about that, but everything would be tied to the license plate, as would your back-end software and management system. So optional, I talk about space sensors because this is what we did in Bar Harbor, but space sensors can be done physically on the meter itself, you know, where it senses a car pulling in and pulling out of a parking space. or we can do space sensors. We can do them a number of ways. They can be video, we can do in the pavement sensors, all kinds of things. So the major benefits of that, it is costly, but the major benefit of that is that you are able to track real-time usage. So your enforcement officer can just open up his laptop and see everyone in town who hasn't paid and or who's overtime. So it's for an enforcement, you can do directed enforcement, go right to those spaces, right? You don't have to walk every. The other big benefit of that is you're collecting data in real time in terms of how busy each meter is. So the way the industry is moving is they're going from flat-based parking everywhere to demand-based parking, where we charge more for. So this allows you to start to look at demand-based pricing over time, gives you tremendous data, and it zeroes out your meter. This is less friendly to the customer, but it's very lucrative. Always that time with space sensors that zeroes out, and the next person has to pay from zero. So that's typically how these sensors are paid for, is the zeroing out of the meter, and it pays it off very quickly, believe it or not. So that would be an option. Okay. There's a back-end management software that goes with that, with the handheld ticket devices that we would use for enforcement. And it can all be managed from one portal. One manager can manage the enforcement, the pay by phone, the meters, and the kiosks, all in one system. Okay. And that system also allows customers to pay online for their parking tickets, for their permits, to appeal parking. Okay. So potential future expandability, we talked about, well, where do you go going forward? You've got the shared lot agreements we talked about, and certainly those represent your biggest expandability option, and they should be pursued as you're implementing the program. For leasing and purchasing potentially, but things that have been raised in the public meeting, the skateboard park is a possibility for expansion in the future. The middle school lot has been raised. I don't know how realistic that is given the circulation patterns there, but potentially for some permit lots in the summer and on weekends might be useful. And then the decking opportunities that we've talked about, the public safety building lot certainly could be decked very efficiently and maybe attractively, because it's screened so well. And the same has been said about the private lot on Knowlton Camden Parking Company. Then just touching on the staffing of such a program and what we usually see for staffing for something like this, a smaller size program. You would need a parking manager, and you really want someone with supervisory experience, someone who's, who would be dealing with budgeting and reporting and comfortable with that, budget to actual, back-end management system controls. These are very user-friendly management systems, I will tell you, but you still want somebody who's comfortable in that environment. They can program the meters, the kiosks remotely. They can change the rates, the times, but they have to be able to do those types of things. And this would all come with training, of course, from the vendor. And it's, as I say, you just want someone who's comfortable in that. And sometimes the manager will do the appeals and the hearings. Sometimes communities want a separate person to do that. So that's parking enforcement officers we've talked about. Really, I see this as in the peak of the season as three enforcement officers on the street, 2 throughout the 9 to 5 period, and maybe 1 during the busy lunchtime period. Some of my clients do all part-time parking enforcement officers, and others will do a mix. So that's really for you. Customer service reps in office for ticket processing, payments, permit sales. This may be a couple of people. Whether you can absorb this in your current staffing, that may be the case. A lot of my communities will break up a lot of this work by departments, and if they already, in the tax collector's office might take the customer service reps if they're selling certain products already, and Public Works always takes the maintenance, repair, and collection, and the police will take the enforcement and that kind of thing. So this is different in every community too. In Bar Harbor, this all pretty much went to the police department, and they had a guy who was just right on it, and he became the parking manager, became a parking expert in within a year's time. I mean, he really did. So, but I wanted to make sure we pointed out there's these functions that again can be absorbed by departments, but that parking manager is key. You really need a dedicated person dedicated to this function. So that's kind of what I'd say as overall parameters. And we can come back to this, but maybe let's just go through the putting this onto a plan, and Audra can show us the map showing the program, because I think it'll give you a visual of what we just kind of described, and then we can really get into it.
Sorry, I'm just having a look for it.
I can email it to you. I have it right here.
I have it up, but for some reason it's not.
We have to go back to that email I sent you, I don't know. But
Let me see if this works.
well, you got it. All right.
I just emailed it to you.
Oh, I have it. It's just,
Oh, it's just that it's not showing up.
yeah.
Yeah.
I guess while we're waiting, did anyone see anything in the study findings that was a concern, or the revised version?
I just got a quick question for you, John. It's Sophie. Well, Audra.
Yes. Hey, Sophie.
How are you? Good to see you. Do we have any idea? So my concern is, how do we estimate the growth of parking demand over the years, and how we can already start kind of planning for it?
Yes.
And if you have any kind of, I know it's hard because every town is different, but any kind of growth kind of year over year you can share with us that you've seen in kind of similar coastal.
Yeah, and this will be in the report. There wasn't a lot of, I mean, of course you have the marina and what's going on, and there's some things being talked about, but there was not a huge amount of development impact potentially, plenty of time to plan for that, like C Street. If the bottom line is one of our guiding principles was, parking is dynamic. So, our planning needs to be as well. I forget the exact wordage, but essentially we need to be looking at the data every single year. This is where almost every community falls down. That they don't go back and look, they implement, they walk away, and 7 years later they do another parking study. Not good. I think what we need to be doing is go back out there continually. And again, those sensors that provide you all this data. I mean, it's fantastic, right? It will show you the turnover. It will show you, you don't need me doing license plate surveys. It's already in real time. But for instance, you need to be considering that development on C Street. Well, what's the impacts? Do we need to go to time limits in certain areas? Do we need to have resident permit? We need to be ready for that in advance. And I'll cover that in the report. I think, there's development options. We talked about infill downtown, the ability to deck. Um, if things go that certain ways, you have scenarios to accommodate the parking. That's the key here for going forward. And we can't presuppose everything that occurs with paid parking. There's always something that wasn't, even me, I've been in this for 30 years, that something will react. That's why we have to go, it will happen that I didn't expect. You have to go back, look at the data, modify the regulations slightly. But you certainly have enough opportunities here for expansion. And given, going back to the overall supply being around 50% demand or use, 50% when you consider the private supply, there's an awful lot of potential supply here to work with. So you're in a good spot.
Thank you.
If that helped. So getting a peek here at what I'm kind of throwing out at you as something to react to that we can kind of talk about, modify, refine. There isn't a right or wrong answer with this, but this is where the data leads us, okay? That the red is really showing our paid parking program. And 4-hour limits, as I say, on the lots, the core commercial lots, 3-hour limits on the streets. And then what I'm showing is a no time limit in the public safety lot. There may be a question, right now I'm sort of saying, well, let's go with a flat rate, $2 per hour across the board, because it's such a small downtown. But you could make an argument that the public safety lot might want to be a lower rate than the public landing lot. Certainly there's demand for both of these facilities, but obviously much greater demand for latent demand, I would call it, for the public landing. Someone leaves space sometimes, somebody waiting to go into it. So there could be an argument made for that. I left the lot on the hill free. There were a lot of comments about making sure that stayed free as a free option, but you could make the argument that if you got the First Congregational Church as a free parking area, that you could start to charge in the lot up there. The reason I didn't too up at the Knowlton Street lot had paid parking is because there were a lot of spaces coned off. So it really only reached effective capacity for an hour or two in the peak demand. And if we consider the amount of spaces that were coned off, which isn't going to be the case, I'm not sure that would have ever been at effective capacity. So we might want to start with that as what I'm showing, the free situation. And again, things can change as we go forward. I wanted to make sure everybody understood the black free 3-hour. We say free, those are residential streets. They're currently being used by employees. They are, we don't typically start with meters in front on residential streets. That's not too everywhere. Mystic right now, we're looking at that as a potential to meter into the residential streets. They did do that in Bar Harbor where they had long-term parking, but these were some of their large residences with, gated houses with gigantic driveways and didn't use the on-street at all. They were set back from the street and that kind of thing. So, but that's what we would typically have a sign that would say 3-hour parking permit exempt, and that would allow either an employee or a resident of the street to park in excess of 3 hours. And that's sort of the approach there. Like High Street is one that I didn't get to talk with the folks who are using that. So that I know the bed and breakfast, that little strip is important, so that we'd have to look at that a little closer. The library lot, you'd still probably want to sign for employees, but you could do a permit program. You'd have to look at what the availability is once that goes into play. So then you still have a good amount of free parking out there in blue. And again, we need to work with some of what I'm showing as highlighted green private lots that were really underutilized during the peak period. And there's real opportunity in all of those, I think. So, okay, so I've talked enough. That's kind of the parameters and the mapping, and feel free to ask questions and what you think we need to change or what we need to reconsider and why did we do this. I'm happy to answer any of those questions too.
I have another question. The map doesn't go to Lake Beach. And have you considered it, especially because in the summer, the parking is becoming really difficult with, people parking at an angle, people parking back to back. It's just kind of a free for all. And I thought we had expanded the scope of the study to include Lake Beach with some proposals there. So is it on another map? Or?
Well, my thought about it is that with Lake Beach that, and I'll include it in the study report, it really needs, so much of what we're doing in this is cured by having community service officers in sufficient number to manage the program, whether that's trucks, RVs, buses, you guys, I would say in that lot, it's really a management issue of where do we want the parking, probably only on one side of that entry drive. So I think, do you stripe that one side so that vehicles aren't parking on both sides, which was the case when I was there. I mean, you couldn't get an emergency vehicle through there, no way. So, do you stripe it on one side, sign it on one side, and enforce it? That's kind of where I was leading with it, because it just, and then, I mean, you're going to have to divert one of your part-timers down there once in a while to make sure that that's occurring. But I don't know that you're doing anything with paid. I don't think you want to charge there, right? Or anything like that. So
I think it's difficult to charge at the beach because typically people want to spend either half a day or a full, or a full day. So I don't know really.
Yeah, I mean,
but
we
know that the yacht club this summer is going to be trying to divert some of their parking from their own parking lot because it's not big enough. So I think we'll have to look at what's happening there, because I wouldn't want the yacht club to put all the cars at Lake Beach because it's convenient for them.
Well, to stripe the spaces, there's not that many spaces there unless you park double load the access aisle on both sides, which you can't do because you don't have the width. So I think striping those would make sense. The question would be whether you want to put a time limit on them. I might suggest starting with just striping what the lawful spaces are, sign them and enforce them. And then
and also prevent people from parking on the green side, on the northern side of the beach, because I've seen that green space completely invaded by cars.
Yes. And that signage should be there as well, maybe on the same signs, so you're not overwhelming the signage. But
did we
I think sorry, go ahead.
The other thing is, in your final study, are you looking at utility vehicles? So we have like campers and Airstreams and things like that. Are we thinking of having like a reserve space for them, or?
I typically we got to talk about time limits within the lots, if that's what you mean. Like they can't stay. I think it's 72 hours. Is that right, Chief? 72 hours in the lots? I'm not sure. Oh, you might be muted.
Yeah, the ordinance says you can't stay on the street more than 24 hours.
How about the lots? Is there a 72-hour requirement, or is there nothing right now? I think
there's nothing in the lots that I can think of off the top of my head, but street side parking is technically you're not supposed to be on the street more than 24 hours.
Do you find any of that happening over 24 hours or long-term in the lots?
Absolutely. Not the lots, yes, but Bayview Street has become known as the place to park if you want to go out for a week on your boat.
Yeah, I got you. Okay.
And in the lot, we've had a real problem with campers that'll park across 5 spaces.
Yeah.
RVs, they'll take up 5 spaces and they'll be there for days on end.
Yeah, and I know that's one of our findings, and I know paid parking takes care of most of that. So But yeah, we have the free lot, you know, having a no overnight, or if you're gonna have an overnight, maybe a time limit on how long in that lot.
The problem
And I
we're
mean-
getting into is, if you let the campers stay there 72 hours, guess where they're camping?
Right?
And you can rap on the door all night long and they're not gonna answer. We run into
Yeah.
that several times.
Yes.
Yeah, having them take up, you know, in a free lot where you're hoping that you get employees or people who are going to be there all day, having them take up, you know, multiple spaces is just a real, you know, waste of that lot.
Yeah. 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 I don't have any clients that would allow any of that. So, but I think if we did keep, you know, if we did keep, the Knowlton Street lot free, then I think we have to deal, if that ends up staying free, then that's what we would have to do. We would have to put in play some requirements that they would not be able to do that. I think does your existing ordinance require people to park within line spaces? I mean, that may be one way to do it, but you can't park across them. Typically, ordinances don't allow that. I mean, but anyway, I think that's something we can deal with. Is there anybody who wants to keep should they be kept in the 5-minute walk zone for some reason? I'm not sure if that's a need to have overnight parking, or is that being, what's the feeling about that?
I mean, I think that we've got areas in town where if everyone feels like they want to accommodate RVs, you know, we have the Snow Bowl, we have
Mm.
the tannery, I mean,
Camden Hills. I mean,
yeah. The
Yeah.
schools in
School, yeah.
Rockport, there's just like a lot of other places where if everyone feels like that's a need and something that the town or the, you know, Camden and Rockport together want to accommodate, I don't think in the 5-minute walk zone that would be appropriate.
Yeah, okay. So it's
would
just an
agree with that.
ordinance. We just need an ordinance to make sure they're not doing what they're doing on Bayview or anywhere else. Yeah. And that's gonna be a time
Yeah.
restriction.
Did we talk about the time restriction, or at least the number, at least, I'm thinking of the public safety lot where people regularly use that for a week at a time. We'll just park in there for the whole week while they're either out on their boat or out on a schooner. That takes up a lot of space as well up there during the summer.
Right, yeah.
At least not exceeding 24 hours, similar to maybe what we have in on-street parking.
Do you think they'll continue to do that when it is, you know, $16 a day? I mean, I don't know. That will be interesting. Or will they move
Yeah.
to because that's what it'll be, $16 a day.
Right.
$100 a day, you pay $100 to stay in the marina overnight. So $16 a day is part of your marina cost, basically.
Yeah.
So not super dissuasive, I would say.
No, I agree.
Would they park in one stall? Because you can't park in multiple. And then would that be okay for you guys? Is it still something you wouldn't want them to store? So they pay for the week, so they pay, you know, $80 for the week to park in the lot. If they take up one stall, would that still be objectionable?
I think so. I mean, I think it's there similar to the downtown on-street parking spaces. I think it serves that function. And if half the lot, or at least a third of the lot or a quarter of the lot is just booked all season, I'd like to find a different place for those folks, similar to the RVs, to be honest.
You know, to prevent that, you'd want one, you have to park in a line space. So that's an ordinance. Two, you would want to have a time limit on how long you're willing to have them there. You know, is that a day? You know,
If they want to come back the next day and park or get someone to do that, that's how the game is played sometimes, right? But to park in one spot consecutively for for 5 days or whatever and not leave. I think that's the struggle.
Yeah. So we could put a 24-hour requirement would that have any unintended consequences for anybody else that you might want to have parking more than 2 days and paying, it's easily enforceable, I think. Anyone can move vehicles around, and we can create ordinance around that as well, but so does that make sense, a 24-hour requirement?
Are we still keeping the Cove Road lot for boaters?
I'm sorry?
Are we still keeping the Cove Road lot for boaters, like, just to go out to sea for a week?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I don't think that lot's really not improved over there, and I'm not sure there's any effort to direct those long-term people that are out on boats over there, and maybe that's what we should look at. I don't know.
Because
Good
we've been
idea.
permit, I think we're up to 32 permits for the year that we issued. I'd have to look, but we've issued quite a few for the Cove Road lot for people to go out to sea. And it seems like that worked, but it's underutilized by quite a bit.
Yeah, I went, all my counts, it was only a handful of cars or less. So it was a few.
Yeah.
4.
I'm wondering if they're actually parking over at the public safety lot, to be honest with you.
No, we have quite a few that come in and get permits, and that lot is utilized, but the lot's in terrible shape. I mean, it's full of water most of the time.
It's not a parking lot. Yeah.
Yeah, we need to improve it and push people to go over there.
Well, just so we don't get off track here a little bit though, for these lots that are down in the prime area, are we saying we want a 24-hour limit? And you have to park in a line space. I mean, the $2 an hour will knock out the majority of those, trust me. I mean, I hear what you're saying about the cost, but they're gonna go try to find a free parking spot and they'll look around for it. But just to make sure, do we want to do 24-hour and park in a line space?
For me, if they're paying for the space, isn't that the goal, is to make money off the space?
A lot of communities feel that way, as long as they're in a space and they're paying the prime fee. But it's a legitimate concern. I don't want stored vehicles that close to my retail area. A lot of people feel that way too. You're just storing a car for a week, you're taking away
Turnover.
potential turn.
Yeah.
So
I think it's one of the things, I think it's one of the things we need to get more data on, probably, as we start using data and have a better sense of how many cars are we talking about? How much revenue loss are we experimenting because we have somebody parking that space for 24 hours, 72 hours, instead of having, a high turnover for those highly priced. It's a downtown area.
yeah, I think it's an excellent point, Sophia, that I don't think we should try to presuppose what might happen after the paid parking goes in. How much easier is it to look at? I mean, it's been this way for how many years, right? This goes into play. We typically, like in Bar Harbor, I came back after their first season and did a look back in. How did it go? Did it do what we thought it was going to do? It did 90% of what we thought it would do, but there was 10% we had no idea it was going to happen, and we had to change some regulations to address those things. So in other words, you may find no campers ever parking in that lot of public safety again because they don't want to pay the $80 a week, or we may find them still there, or maybe there's the ones that are still there. It's only a few and it's okay. But I think to your point, we come back and look at that and then modify. I don't think that's going to be a major issue. Storage of really large vehicles. I have difficulty wondering why you want to store anything in this, what you're looking at on screen, because whether that's tour buses or whatnot, like if they're, I don't think you want long-term parking anywhere in here. So
What do you mean in here?
in this 5-minute zone, I'm not sure why you'd want
Yeah.
to have anything be stored of size. It doesn't, and you can price it such that they don't want to do that, hopefully, but
I mean, there's also, for me, there's also an aesthetic value. Do I want to have campers downtown? Or it's not pretty. And
Yeah.
one of the things Camden is pretty.
Yes. Yeah, Plymouth, for instance, is very pro RV. They have a lot of campgrounds, so they don't want them staying down a long time. They don't want to, but they want to accommodate them. So in Plymouth, they created an entire lot for the RVs. Short term, they can't stay overnight or anything like that. They have to go back to their campground. But there's so many people coming because of the park system that's important to them. So everybody's different on that issue, but most everybody's the same about no overnight. I had the same thing on South Mill Pond in Portsmouth when I was their parking director, and we had you know, everyone taking vacation there. We had to move them out of there, and they moved to Walmart, and that was the end of that. So, but
Yeah, I think the parking by Rennie's and things like that is a perfect, would be a good spot to have RVs or campers during the day. They can walk downtown. It's a nice walk actually. And then they can go back. It's an interesting idea. And then they can go back to their camping grounds, if that's how we call them, or RV grounds. I like this idea.
so how about the time limits and the coverage? Feel free to, you know, the 3 hour and the 4 hour, for instance, does that feel right to you guys? Is that, is there concern about that being too long, or?
I like the 3 hour. That's just me.
Would you make everything 3? Is that the lot in other words, the lots in the street that I'm showing?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I appreciate the needs of some of our merchants, you know, and having spaces occupied 3 hours at a time may limit those. I mean, we already have 2 hour limit, right? So it's another hour. But yeah, I just think 3 is better than 4. That's just my thinking. And I don't know how to handle the on street, especially in the core. Seems like 3 may be too long in the core, but just my thinking.
So
Yeah,
you
I
would-
mean,
So,
sorry, go ahead.
so can you help me understand what you, like on Elm Street and Main Street, you would favor 2 hours?
Are you talking to me, Sophie?
I am. I was trying to understand what you meant by what location are you talking about?
Well, I would think we were talking about all of the on-street parking downtown. Is that correct, John?
Okay. So you would,
Right.
and you would rather see a 2 hour limit there?
No, I think we're at 2 now. I think 3 is probably, and the question was, should we do 3 or 4? Should we look at that? And I thought looking at 3 was appropriate. But maybe looking more, kind of look at it with a finer tooth comb in the core areas where merchants, you know, I'm thinking of French and Braun, where people come in and get out pretty quickly. I'm just wondering if having those spaces, all 3 in and around that area, is appropriate. Just my thing.
John, what's the trend on hourly parking?
What's the what?
What's the trend around New England as far as hours?
Well,
for parking?
if it's free parking, it's usually 1 or 2 hours because you know, otherwise it'll get abused. Once you go to paid parking, we're seeing the trend move to 3 hours because, you know, nobody wants to kick the customer out of his space. We want to spend as much money and as much time they need to spend as much money as they want, or as much time having fun downtown. So the trend is 3 hours. The trend beyond that is for those communities that have been in this business for, you know, a long time, they're moving toward demand-based pricing and removing all time limits. And what that does is it says, let the fee dictate the behavior. I don't want to kick anybody out of this, but you want to spend 6 hours, go ahead. But maybe that becomes progressively more expensive as time goes on because it's a high demand space. So the movement for demand-based pricing is the highest demand spaces might cost $4 an hour, and the cheaper ones might be 50 cents an hour. So, you know, that's, but that gets confusing. And I think right now for starting, the movement's to 3 hours. That's kind of what we're seeing. But
One of the complaints that I hear a lot is I spent an hour on each side of Main Street and then I went to lunch and, you know, I didn't have time and I got a ticket. And so I think I would advocate for 3 hour. I see you've got 4 listed at the public landing. Another big complaint is, how can I go on a 2-hour cruise and then I come back and I get a parking ticket because the cruise took a little longer. So 4 hours might be a little long at the public landing. 3 would probably be, that would probably work with the boating schedule better. That's something we might want to talk with the schooner captains about, because if you keep that extra hour when they get off the boat, then that doesn't have any turnover for the next group that wants to go out. So 4 might be a little long there.
that's a good point. That's a good point right there. Yes.
Three is a good idea because so you pay 3 hours up front, right? You don't pay by the hour. So if you want to renew once,
Yeah,
right. So if you have a 3 hour parking limit and you re-up it, it's more revenue for the town because the chances that you're going to use the second 3 hours are lower. But if you only do 2 hours, you get less revenue. You see what I mean? I'm not being very clear. The second tranche, you're probably not going to use the full hour, the full 3 hours, but we will get paid for the full 3 hours. And then there's going to be turnover. So that space is going to generate more revenue if we have a 3 hour time limit than a 2 hour time limit.
Only if the space cancels out. Right, John?
What's that?
Only if the space cancels out. Zeroes out.
Yeah, it will at the pay station. It will, the pay station zero out automatically. Yeah, you'll get that. So, but I did get comments about even the restaurants, people feeling it wasn't enough time, 2 hours. You know, if you wanted to, you may take a while to figure out which restaurant you're even going to before you get it, you know, if you don't have a reservation. So I got a good amount of that too. So it seems like 3 would be a minimum and 4 is something you could consider, but I'm hearing 3 right now from.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, particularly going out for dinner, you know, if you're going to go have a drink somewhere and then go have dinner, I mean, 2 hours isn't a lot of time. So, but, you know, and just thinking about, you know, the public landing, 2 hours isn't enough. Like Randy said, you know, that we hear that all the time at the chamber about where can I park because I'm going on a, you know, to get 2 hour parking here and a 2 hour sale. So I think 3 makes sense, but I think also we, you know, you want some turnover down there so that the next wave of passengers have a place to park too, right? But the flip side is you don't necessarily want to rush people out of town either, right? I mean, the hope is that people will take a day sale and then also wander downtown and have lunch and do some shopping and all of that. So I'm intrigued by the progressive charge for a space. Just, you know, in very simplest terms, if the first hour was $1 and the second hour then became a $2 and then the third hour is $3, I'm, you know, like the longer you stay, the more it costs you. And I'm sure there's lots of different ways to do that, but you know, does anybody do that? Is there any merit to that idea?
Yeah, I would say not out of the gate. I think one of the things we want to do with introducing paid parking is make sure that it's simple and understandable for folks. But I also think before you do that, you want a lot of data, which you're going to get from these pay stations and meters. Now, I also like progressive pricing, and you know, if you say if you think about it, the 2 hour limit, which has been around forever, was put there because, you know, 85-90% of the trips can be done in 2 hours. Well, what about the other 10 and 15%? they're legitimate business trips that are over 2 hours that we talked
Right.
about. Why are
Sure.
we kicking them up? Makes no sense, right? It makes no sense. So, and you'll have realtors, lawyers, you'll have those types of folks who will gladly park for 5, 6 hours and pay whatever you charge them and be very happy with that. Now, whether you want to accommodate that is a different question.
Right.
So, but progressive pricing allows that. And I'd say that's something really, Tom, to think about, after getting a year's worth of data and maybe a couple of years of seeing what's going on with the system and how it shakes out.
Sure.
But at the public landing for the turnover for the schooner trips, we may want to consider having a 1 3-hour slot and not 2, because that would defeat the purpose.
Not following the 2 3-hour, not following that, Sophia. What do you mean the second?
So if people can re-up on a 3-hour after their schooner trip and keep a spot for 6 hours, then how does the second?
No, they can't. They can't.
So it's just a one-time 3-hour parking.
Correct. It's like any time limit you have. And a lot of my communities will say not only you only get 3 hours, but you have to leave the lot. You can't move your car to another space in the lot. There's a typical ordinance says that you have to leave the lot or you have to leave the block face. You can't
re-up.
And the pay by phone. So if you're out there and you say, well, I paid for 2 hours because I'm only taking a 1 hour trip. So you pay on the pay station or you can do it from the boat. You can add that hour, but if you try to add more than 3 hours, it won't let you do it.
So you pay for 3 upfront and then you can add an hour.
Nope. So 3 hours is the limit. You can never stay or pay for more than 3 hours. Some people don't know it's going to be 3 hours. So they go out because it's a 1 hour trip and they say, well, it's only 1 hour. And they get delayed out there. So I only paid for an hour. Oh my gosh, I'm going to get a ticket when I get back, or I paid for 2 hours. They can add up to 3 hours. They can add the second and third hour from the boat on their phone. This is a very, very popular feature and it's used that way because that was always a limitation, right? Someone would have to pay for the full 3 hours and say, I don't expect to be an hour, but I don't want to get a $35 ticket. Now they don't have to do that. They can pay what they think it's going to be and then just add, but you can't go over 3.
It's paid hourly, but it's a maximum of 3 hours in one spot. I'm sorry.
Just as it is today. It's 2 hours. You can't stay long. You're right.
I get it.
That's what the limit is.
Is there any type of system that's tied into like the business establishment in that location? And like, let's say the business changes and they have the opportunity to, have like one, like let's say it's like Todd's business. He needs that 15-minute type of parking. Would it make sense that if you have a type of business that requires, an in and an out, that you have a slot or 2 slots that get, changed to that type of parking in that location based on your business type? Or does that just get too complicated? You know what I mean? Because I can see, you don't want to have to accommodate every situation, but I can see how, a lot of the people's business or some of the businesses are really relying on the in and out. The person that lives in town is just stopping in, they're grabbing something and they're leaving. And that can change depending on, who's renting the establishment. I mean, French and Braun's been there a long time. Everybody references that, but that will continue to change around town. And you have this, the new trend of people doing takeout and that kind of thing. So I'm kind of wondering if you're going to have that kind of business, maybe you pay, your permit or whatever your fee is for your establishment. And along with that comes like a 15-minute space kind of in your location that gets changed over if that's what that establishment goes to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Does that make any sense, or is that?
Yeah, it does. And I mean, first and foremost, once why are we implementing paid parking? We're going to be creating availability on streets right now where you just drive by parked cars, right? So So with this paid parking system, the major benefit is you're creating availability. You're not going to no longer have 95% use on some of these streets. It might be 82% used or 75%, but there's going to be available spaces within 2 or 3 spaces of where you want to be. That's the whole purpose of what we
Just the
find, right?
nature of the whole transition.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, all right.
So you're gonna create that availability, and within that availability, people can just push the button on the meter and get 15, well, we're gonna say 20 minutes, right? To run in anywhere,
Oh, okay, yeah.
right? So then the question becomes, after looking at the data and the availability, do you now need to make a designated free 20-minute space in front of something? Because there's never availability. Even with the meter, there's not availability.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know that now because we don't have it. But
Right.
once we go through a year, you may find that there are locations where you want to designate it. Typically, it's post offices for sure. And some communities will put, if there's a, three restaurants in a row where there's a huge amount of takeout and the metered spaces are still being used at that
Mhm.
high level, they might consider putting in a 20-minute space right there.
So that's
Free,
probably a
free.
really important aspect of the rollout of all of this, is explaining that really gets reevaluated and adjusted based on that data.
Yes.
Because I
Yeah.
could see how people could get really nervous about the fact of, what if this doesn't work? And now I've got less people coming and going, and now my business model is like losing money.
Yeah. Well, by definition, because of the lack of turnover, we typically see a big increase in terms of retail receipts, but there's no turnover going on. But that being said, for instance, on Washington Street, French and Broad, yeah, I don't think you want to lose that 30-minute space and where you're having a sufficient amount of box truck loading going on and that kind of thing, which is, as far as I could see, is working wonderfully. But again, back to your point, you don't need all of the 15-minute spaces you probably have out there right now, because you're going to create a lot of availability. Plus, you're going to give them that free 15 up front anyways. We're now saying 20. So this will be a huge improvement over that. But it's not to say you don't come back and create some zones for 30-minute. I don't want to eliminate any up front that we know is really valuable, like that one on those ones on a couple of them there on Washington.
So basically, rolling out this project will give us a baseline of data. Then we can create different zones, and it's easy to do because it's just a digital adjustment.
Yes. It's a digital adjustment. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And the refinement never ends. It's constant. Every single year with my communities, there's a change. And because demand is changing, stores move, and you'll see it in the numbers. It'll come right back at your parking manager. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm not getting turnover here. I have something going on over here. Looks like the time limit is not correct. So there's minor refinements, but you should see major benefits in availability with the paid system.
Randy's really good at that anyway.
I used to like you today.
John, I've got a question about these free all-day spots on these residential streets. My thought is they are not heavily utilized now. Maybe I'm wrong, but if you start charging people to pay downtown, those streets are going to see more parking. Is that correct? And what's the impact on those residential areas?
Yes, great question. And that's why, like First Congregational Church and these places, if we can get some agreements, are so important to get a free public option, because, if you use like Pearl Street, for example, we didn't see a single car. I think there was like 1 or 2 cars on that street for all of the hours over all the days we counted. So there's just a huge amount of parking out there that's just not getting used, right? But First Congregational might be more convenient, honestly, just because of its access points, right? Now, that's not to say after charging, you might get a few more cars out there, but that's probably not a problem, because you've got just eons of, it's not going to impact residential parking. If it does, though, you have the tool in your toolkit to go to 3-hour permit exempt parking, or create a situation where you issue a permit to the resident to exceed that 3-hour limit. If that occurs. So there's tools in the toolbox to determine that. I have many communities, they say, well, let's just do it now so it never happens. Really, you want to fight the urge to do that and see a year's worth of, see what actually happens, because as I say, we can't presuppose what you might think, you know, what's going to happen. But I still get surprised with some of that. But having those extra lots like First Congregational, super important. You know, it's those free options.
John, what community, if you were gonna say all of the places you've ever done, is the most like this situation in as many aspects as you can kind of nail down? And what happened, I guess, if you could.
Well, I think Bar Harbor is not too far. It's a much bigger scale. You know, it's a bigger, you know, you know, and I would say Newburyport is not too far off, although they've been in the paid parking business for a long time. You know, Mystic is very close, but they're in the same spot you are. They're just going into implementation of paid parking. So we don't have the results yet. But yeah, I mean, I think I would look at your neighbor to the north. I really think, because it's just happened. The pricing's very similar. Their seasonal issues are similar. Their permits are similar. You know, they have more tourism, yes, but they deal with all the same things, residents downtown, and I think they're a great partner for you.
Yeah.
But you guys are well situated. You have a lot of lots. You have a lot of options. You still have some availability. You're in a good spot to do this, I think.
Cool.
So does everyone understand the 3-hour permit exempt on say Chestnut and Mountain, what we're talking about? Because there is some impact to the resident. They do have to be issued a permit if they want it. A lot of them might have off-street parking, so they don't care. And I know a lot of parking's going on there today. But one of the things that we found in our study was that because, you know, there's so much impact from the employee to the south, because there's just not enough parking, public parking facilities down there. Everything's up in the north. That's why so many people are parking at public landing. So many employees are there and down at Chestnut. So what's going to happen to those folks if we don't allow them to park in illegally, unlawfully as they are today in the public landing lot? Okay, some of those are going to shift out to the public safety building lot and pay a permit, you know, a nominal fee, you know, $50 a season. Some will say, no, I don't want to do that. I'm going to park for free. And they may try that for a while and go out to a free lot or a street. And others might go down to Chestnut and buy a permit and park down there. The permit would be good anywhere if that makes sense. So anywhere that we allow permits, they would be able to park.
John, I don't know, forgive me if I'm repeating something that I missed. I was distracted earlier, but I see on the C Street, you have free all-day parking right there. And I mean, there's some development that's occurring there, and I don't know if that will change how that gets utilized.
Yeah, it will, and I was mentioning that earlier, that I think once that development goes in, it's, you know, it's something that you know, obviously you'd want to work with the development on what the impact on the street is, but you won't know till it actually goes in.
Okay.
And to set a bunch of regulations beforehand won't make much sense. But I think you need to be ready to move. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to comment, during the planning board review and approval of that project, the planning board was concerned about pedestrian safety along C Street, and
this,
encouraged the town to address pedestrian issues over there. I mean, I think everyone acknowledges, and I mean, on-street parking is public parking. And everyone acknowledged that during the meeting, but they did have concerns about the pedestrian.
Yeah, and I
Safety
think
there, so.
Randy might be able to speak to it too, but I think there was a lot of there was some residential concern about the parking kind of along that road too. We hear from, fairly frequently, but
Yeah, I just
Well,
got
I
a complaint about it yesterday.
yeah.
I mean, I always struggle with this. On-street parking, the public road is not the parking of the people and, of the residents there. And I think oftentimes we tend to kind of cater to the residents, and I understand that, but it is a public way, right? It's a public lot.
Yes.
It's a public parking. And I don't think we should try to put it out there that people should expect that the spaces in front of their house are for them. I mean, it's for everybody. And I know it doesn't politically correct sometimes, but I mean, I think that's the reality. It's not their parking, it's the municipal parking, municipal road. And if we can do it safely and appropriately and make sure that, we don't have spaces too close to intersections and we accommodate pedestrians effectively and safely, then I think it is an advantage and a plus to encourage people to park on street outside of the core.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would say, another thing that'll be in the study report is that, Dave does a great job with the striping. I like to see the striping. What I used to do in the residential is stripe because I'd get complaints too, when it wasn't so much that someone's using the space, it's someone's blocking my driveway, someone's up on my grass, and parking, you can either stripe all the stalls. Like if we go with this permit exempt on Chestnut and Mountain Street, those spaces should be striped. Definitely out Mountain Street. If nothing else, it provides a visual cue that you've got a huge amount of parking out Mountain Street. So let's stripe them. I know the pavement's failing there. So when you redevelop that street, may stripe those spaces. But that aside, what I used to do in the residential is I would stripe the no parking areas just because I didn't want to dump all that paint. So I would stripe the fire hydrant clearances, the driveway. I would do driveway clearances sometimes if it was a problem, side streets. And that gives people the visual cue. Don't park in somebody's, walkway, driveway, whatever it is. Cut down on
John,
complaints a lot. Yeah.
And I don't know if anybody, it looks like there's a parking lot missing on C Street. Is that just me or is that, Randy, isn't there a parking lot back there?
It's over on Cove.
Oh, okay, Cove, yeah, and I don't see that on here. Maybe I'm not missing it.
Yeah, well, it was out of the 5-minute walk zone, believe it or not, from the downtown. So we didn't include it, but we did include it in our counts, and I can show it. Yeah.
No problem. I didn't see it, and
yeah. But I can add that, yeah. But yeah, very underutilized when we counted it. How about the no time? How about the no time limit at the public safety building lot?
Yeah, I was just going to ask about that. And whether that's appropriate for permit parking or if we should be trying to encourage those people to go to like the Knox Mill lot.
Well, the permits would be, would be paying. They'd be paying. So you want to make sure that employee permit is high enough, right? That some of them are going to want to walk the extra, 2 minutes to go to the other lot for free, right? If you make the employee permit $10 or something, no, everybody buys it and goes there. And then they can't find spaces. And so I think you want to set that rate. I was saying $50 for the season. So that they would, a lot of people will choose to try to go to the other one.
Yeah. How do you handle that, John, when we get, we sell 100 or 200 permits and there's enough spaces for 100, how do you manage those permit holders that are kind of irate because they expect to get parking for their permit?
Yeah, so the program, and this is true everywhere, the permit doesn't guarantee you a space, and that's right in the rules and regs, and people are still willing to pay whatever you charge, honestly.
Yeah, okay.
But what you do say is, if you don't find it, there may be times where, especially if you're not there early in the morning, you may have to go over to the skateboard park. I mean, sorry, the Knowlton Street lot, or maybe if we have First Congregational.
Yeah.
Hopefully that doesn't happen, so because the pricing, but it could.
John, I have a question on the permit. So if let's say I buy that $50 permit, does that mean I can go down to the public landing? I can go to the public safety building, or I can go any of these places anytime I want and park all day?
No, and so this map's a little confusing on that, because if you see the P on public landing, it means permit, but it says in parentheses fisherman permits. It should say fisherman permit only. Okay, so I'll modify that. So no, you can only, if you have a permit, what we're saying is you can only park really on Mountain Street, Chestnut Street, and the public safety building lot. Permits aren't allowed in the retail lots.
So unlimited hours though on those locations you just said?
For the employee, yeah. I mean, it gets you through the paid hours of 9 to 5 or 9 to 6.
I
Yes.
guess that's, and so the same thing with the fisherman's permit. So does that get them 9 to 5, 7 days a week? Or, well, I guess we're only looking at 6 days a week.
Well, fisherman permit, I'm assuming you would still keep them signed for fisherman permit only. So that's really only limited to them all the time. Some communities limit how many. Do you guys limit how many fisherman permit? Usually there's a cap on them because there's just not enough spaces, but that's less of a concern.
We have a limited amount now, but I think it's too many given the number of, we only have like 3 fishermen, but I think maybe 10 spaces for them.
Yeah.
So I think that the amount of fishermen permitted spaces needs to be tied to the amount of actual fishermen that we have with licenses.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I have 2 communities that cap that number because they say, it's first come, first serve, and it's the first, whatever. And just because there's too many, but that's a decision by the community. So does that make sense though, Todd, about where the employee permits can go?
Yes. Yeah, that clears it up. Thank you.
I mean, that's why I said there was an argument, if you had the First Congregational Church lot, which is huge during the weekdays, to charge in the Knowlton Street lot. But I thought, and put permits there too. But I thought maybe start with this. You can always expand to that. And then the way I always work it is every time I make a free lot a paid lot, I want to create a new free lot or create a new free location further away.
And John, what do you think the likelihood is of some of these privately owned lots kind of converting to paid or permitted parking and being better utilized?
Once you implement the paid on-street system and with your change on the zoning ordinance, that will happen, as I say, regardless of what any of us do. It will happen on its own. It'll happen faster if we partner with them. That this is typically the genesis of a paid system. Those lots that are grossly underutilized, private lots, will all of a sudden become very utilized, and they'll see profit money. I'm doing this, as I say, in Mystic with working with the art museum lot. And what happens down there, essentially is what happens here is when you move toward that paid parking, they will some of these lots will start to charge for parking, which is a great thing because otherwise those are empty spaces all day, as it is today, you know.
I've got a question about that too. Is there any, if I owned a private lot in Camden and I was, renting it out for monthly or whatever, and now I want to convert it to where I charge $10 a day or whatever, and put in a system to do that, either gated or the kiosk. Is that something I can do automatically? Does the town have to weigh in on that and somehow, permit that? How does all that work? How easy is it for a private lot owner to say, I'm going to now open this up for hourly or daily parking?
Well, this is one of the greatest things associated with the program as we go forward. I've done this a number of times. As we're moving forward, there's an ability for us to piggyback a procurement that you're going to do for pay stations or meters that they can piggyback on and use that in the private lot. So sometimes communities will do that. We'll open that up as a possibility to allow them so that you have one system, because their customer is your customer, and it's nice to have a single type of technology there that people can be used to. So now I do have some communities that have a business permit requirement when they start a parking quote unquote business. In other words, they're charging for public parking. I don't know if Camden has anything like that.
Well, I think, Lehman, I think maybe to help answer it, I mean, the planning office may require a revision to their approved site plan to review some of that, some of the details. But I think that is probably it that we would require would likely be just a review and approval of their site plan, modification thereof. Parking facilities are allowed in all the downtown zones. So it's not a use issue. It'd really be like a site development piece that would be reviewed.
It's a great question though. And I expect the utilization of these green highlighted lots to go up over time significantly. There's a lot of capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what these private lots, I don't know what they're getting in the way of revenue, but to me, this would be a way to, they could probably get more if they would go through this process. I know it may be seasonal, but it seems like it would be very lucrative.
Yeah, Lehman, it's interesting because it's the same issues for the privates as it is for the public. We're talking about going from a passive, even if they have a gate, it's a passive program. It just sort of, let's lease out a space, let's lease these space. Maybe we can lease a couple of different people for one space, but usually it's a single space, and so it's done very passively. It means that them becoming an active participant, and the revenue just hasn't been there for them to do that because it's free parking everywhere. So the revenue they derive out of those lots is very, very low, honestly, relatively very low. But once you go to a paid parking program, then they have the incentive to maximize the use of their lots, if you will, because there's a revenue. They're business people. And,
Are there any communities that offer an opportunity for the town to use their system to implement in the private lot, and then they and manage it for them from a utilization standpoint, and then for a fee?
Yes, I've seen it go a number of different ways. Typically, what I see is usually they, they'll allow the lot to go for public use, and the public entity to manage it, right down to the kiosk and collecting and maintaining it. And then there's an agreement written up on the revenue side. Alternatively, sometimes they own the equipment and they have an agreement with the town to come in and enforce on their lot. If they don't have a gate, it has to be enforced. So they'll have an agreement with the town to do enforcement on that lot if it's public parking. So I've seen it a number of different ways, but it's not uncommon at all.
John, when do you bring in these folks? I mean, I think I really see the church lots really working for this type of this type of scenario. When do you bring them in? Should we be reaching out to those folks now, or to get their support? I mean, because this
Yes.
obviously has to go to the community, and it's going to create I think there's going to be a lot of discussion about this stuff. I mean, should we be reaching out now to them and
Yes.
trying to bring them along?
And Audra, I think you have reached out
Okay.
already. And it's a great point, and I'm doing the same in Mystic, is that you want to get them on board early and understand what their needs are, and understanding if because sometimes they say, well, the reason there isn't an agreement to begin with is because we need it so many days. We don't want to. Well, we can still work with that. We can use it on Saturday. So yes, absolutely. And hopefully, that can occur right up to implementation that we're continually talking.
I mean, I see the challenge for churches probably being, the funerals, if you will. I mean, they don't know when those are happening, and all of a sudden, a certain day. So having the agreement loose enough that gives them that opportunity to take over the lot and when they need it, even if it's on a Saturday.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And for instance, I've had situations where we have very large lots, like you have there at the Congregational Church, where they say, you know what, other than Sunday at our 11 o'clock service, 10 o'clock or whatever it is, we only use 2/3 of the lot. So why don't you take the back third furthest away from the church, and we'll stripe those yellow and we'll stripe everything else white. And we'll have signs that say that. And then I've had others say, we use all the lot. And we, like you say, funerals and unknown to us, we're going to have things come up. That's okay too. If it's, as you say, in the agreement, and the permit holders know that on the front end, if there are permit holders, we take care of all those. Those are not issues. Now, there are some lots, particularly churches, who will only want to have permit parkers in them because for that reason, they want to know who's in the lot. And they want to know that you have their license plate and their phone number at any time to contact them and tell them, hey, on Tuesday, you're not going to be able to park there. Right. So we can work. That's why I say there's so many different potential issues. To participate. Yeah. But again, in that too, valet works very well in that situation.
Yeah.
Valet can be very controlled who's there, and and communication wise, it's very good.
John, back to your question about agreements between private lots and the town. Are there any instances where the town would somehow gain control of those lots through a lease or something else, and then now it becomes, for their purposes, public parking? I mean, is that an option? Is that something that's done elsewhere?
Yeah, no, and I tell my communities in all cases, options to either earlier, even is looking at those lots. As a parking manager, I was always looking at lots, especially ones that aren't getting used, as they may have. But yes, to your question, the answer to your question is yes. I'll definitely. And just one other point on validation that I don't know that I really covered with the technology that it is. If you're a hotel or a restaurant on validation, the technology we're kind of using, you can use coupon codes and these things to send to your customers, who can put the coupon code into the kiosk and get validated parking. You can also do it on the back end where if you pay with the mobile app, you can go to the business owner, whether it's a restaurant or a hotel. I'm using, for example, and they can validate your parking on their own laptop. They're given access to be able to back charge that credit card statement. So this is a very, very popular thing. We do it with gyms that are downtown, a lot of fitness centers and things like that. And it's really nice for the businesses to be able to decide and participate in the cost of their own customers' parking. Very popular program. And we can promote which businesses are actually doing validation and that kind of thing. It's nice. Think about. So I don't know, Audrey, whether I think maybe continue to send in questions as they come up. We're going to come back again in January. I'm going to get you guys the presentation in advance and some more input. I think it's great for me if things come up to you, any questions, that you send them to me and we can have a conversation offline and try to refine this better.
Great.
Does that make sense?
It's great stuff, John. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Super
Thank you.
interesting.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think that's all I really have, Audra.
I guess this-
Public meeting cover.
Nope, just, does anybody else have anything before we sort of wrap up for today? And the meeting has been scheduled for, I believe it's January 25th.
Yep.
And we're gonna work on trying to hold that at the middle school. Because I don't know, it just seems to be an environment where more people like to attend meetings than
Yeah.
when we have them here.
Yep.
John, I have one comment. Just on number 4, in your findings, just the last where you're talking about public versus private off-street parking imbalance. The last sentence there, I read that as if the town has not tweaked our zoning or our parking requirements yet. And I don't know if you could just wordsmith that a little bit better.
What number is it? Sorry, what number is it, Jeremy?
This is on page 1,
Page
number
1.
4.
Yeah.
The last sentence from the public versus private off-street parking imbalance. It just says, as well as long-standing off-street parking requirements, mandatory parking minimums in the town zoning ordinance. I read that as if we haven't done anything to address those long-standing minimum parking requirements.
Oh, I got you.
And I just thought maybe.
Oh, I got it. I got it. Yeah.
Wordsmithing that a little bit.
Yeah.
We haven't.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that,
Just my thought.
I wouldn't worry about it too much, because when you did counts, like that really hadn't been addressed at that point.
Yeah.
We were in the process of it, but I don't think either it hadn't been addressed or it hadn't been addressed recently enough that it was going to make much of a difference in terms of the way the system worked.
Yeah.
In any way, we'll have to redo this once we put the system in place, right? Because the ordinance to accommodate for the new zoning and the new paid parking and everything. So to me, it's impossible actually to have the correct ordinance right now, because we don't know, we haven't made a decision on how we're going to use how we're going to change the parking situation.
Right, and also,
So it makes sense that it's not.
Jeremy, where did churches land in the discussion around the zoning ordinance amendment? I don't remember.
Let me look here. I think we, I don't remember either off the top of my head, but let me find it.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if that's going to cause us a problem.
Well, maybe we'll go back to them. Let's see.
Yeah.
Hold on.
What is this?
Yeah, we left those as one space for every 4 seats. So we'll have to tweak that a little bit, Audra, maybe.
Okay.
I'll look at that.
Mhm.
The board try to keep most large assemblies uses in. But we can figure it out.
Does anybody have anything else? Are we good for now?
This is great.
Feel
All right,
free
well,
to give me a
thank you.
call. Feel free to give me a call too, if anybody wants to. It's easy to discuss or text, email, whatever you want to do. And I think even something's occurred after the meeting door, so we can and get that back to everybody. So thank you for today. Appreciate it.
That was really good.
Yes, thank you, John.
Thank you, John. Thank you for the conversation,
Thank you.
everyone.
And thank you, everyone.
All right.
Thank
all
you,
right,
John, and everyone.
Happy holidays.
All right.
You too.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Thank you.